Welcome to The Critique. The material we're looking at today explores how our own internal rituals, using things like dopamine boosts and emotional mirroring, really architect the whole Christmas morning experience. It argues that these deep-seated mechanisms are what's truly in control, not outside forces.
Right.
So let's just jump right into that core assertion. The writer really comes out swinging, They set up this clear conflict by stating who is not in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And they make this really strong case for ritual by using that specific line. That's who controls Christmas morning. Not corporations, not algorithms, but rituals.
And it's immediately captivating. I mean, the clarity of that premise is a huge strength. This idea that we're sort of subject to our own constructed rituals, it's fascinating.
It is.
I do wonder, though, if we've considered the complexity of drawing such an absolute line in the sand, between our internal rituals and the external forces that are being so explicitly dismissed. To really make the argument more robust, I think the discussion has to move beyond a simple binary. It needs to explore the symbiotic relationship between our innate human ritual and all that commercial influence.
Hold on, though. If the material's whole point is that rituals have control instead of corporations, doesn't bringing corporations back in just undercut the entire premise? Are you saying the writer got it fundamentally wrong?
No, not wrong. Not at all. Just maybe oversimplified the environment it's operating in. The material dismisses corporations and algorithms completely. And when you do that, you risk creating a bit of a structural gap in the argument of control.
A gap how?
Well, the core idea that rituals are the mechanism is perfectly sound. It's brilliant. But the content of that mechanism, and even the intensity of it, is being actively shaped by those outside forces.
Okay, so if the rituals are the engine that's already inside of us, then corporations are supplying the specialized, highly optimized fuel and maybe even the driving instructions.
Precisely. That's a perfect way to put it. The material is so good at defining the psychological triggers, the waiting, the smells, the morning light. But the actual stuff in the ritual, it relies so heavily on commercially produced products and, culturally prescribed expectations.
Right.
That's where we need to introduce a little more nuance. So the suggestion is really to integrate that corporate influence. Show how these companies actually leverage our inherent desire for ritual and all those psychological triggers the text already outlines.
Okay.
This way, you're acknowledging the power of the rituals, but you're also placing them in their real, contemporary context.
That feels like a much stronger position, actually. It shifts the argument from, say, corporations are irrelevant, to something more like corporations are just really clever manipulators of our own internal architecture.
Yes, exactly. It strengthens the argument because it shows how resilient that ritual mechanism is, even when it's being co-opted.
Okay, I see that.
I mean, think about the specific example in the material. Waiting your turn, a great one. But if the ritual is that anticipation, that moment of observation, how does the sheer quantity or cost of the gifts, which are purely commercial elements, how does that impact the feeling of the wait?
Well, if the stack of gifts is enormous, the ritual of waiting becomes much more intense.
Right. The dopamine release when that waiting finally ends is amplified by the perceived commercial value.
So the success of the ritual, or at least the intensity of it, is directly tied to a commercial scale? The ritual is the vehicle, but commerce is setting the velocity?
It is. And we also have to look at how corporate marketing often prescribes new rituals, basically designing the architecture that we think is purely our own.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think of those super popular toys that basically mandate a specific step-by-step unboxing sequence. That's a ritual of revelation designed by a company. Or those seasonal food brands that become so tied to a specific scent memory that you can't imagine the day without them.
So the reader thinks they're following this personal family tradition, something passed down for generations. But that tradition might have been engineered just a few years ago by a marketing team.
A marketing team that is capitalizing directly on the dopamine loops you've already identified.
Wow.
That's the power of reframing it. By addressing this co-option, the analysis becomes so much richer. The writer isn't just ignoring commerce. They're showing how our powerful, intrinsic rituals are constantly being, well, almost weaponized by external forces. It makes the whole piece feel more comprehensive, more insightful.
Okay, moving on. I just want to highlight the sheer observational quality here. The writer has an exceptional eye for diagnosing all the inputs. Morning light boosts dopamine. Laughter releases bonding chemicals. And that whole concept that children anchor the experience, it's all just stellar stuff.
It is. And building on that, those observations are incredibly insightful. They're the strongest foundation of the piece. But we need to ask, what's the ultimate practical payoff for the reader?
The so what?
Exactly. The discussion of ritual architecture needs to transition from this really smart intellectual observation to something practical, something that empowers the reader to consciously manage or even optimize these mechanisms.
So we're moving from just explaining how the machine works to giving the audience the user's manual for that machine.
That's it. Exactly. The script right now is a powerful analysis. It tells us what controls the experience, but it doesn't offer a practical next step, a so what. It identifies Christmas morning as a mental bookmark where you'll remember the feeling for life, which is beautiful, but it doesn't give the listener any agency in designing or even editing that bookmark.
That feels like a missed opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity.
But wait, rituals. By their very nature, they're often subconscious, right? Deeply ingrained patterns. If the ritual is what's really in control, how can an average person suddenly become the ritual architect and consciously design something that's meant to feel intrinsic? Wouldn't that effort, that intervention, kind of break the magic?
That is the critical tension, and we need to address it head on. The suggestion isn't to frame this as a manual for starting from scratch. That would feel forced. It's about framing it as a manual for intentional ritual maintenance.
And repair.
Maintenance and repair. I like that. People are dealing with ritual decay all the time. Families change, there are new distractions, traditions just get stale. The goal isn't to invent a whole new, effortful ritual. It's to learn how to consciously maintain or fix the architecture they already have. So, if these rituals shape our memory for life, the material should explore how readers can deliberately maintain, adapt, or repair this architecture. The goal is to make sure the resulting memory is robust and positive, especially as family dynamics inevitably change over time.
Right.
The analysis is all there already. We just need to shift the frame from being a passive observer to being an active architect.
That transition really does bring the significance of the whole piece into sharper focus. It gives the reader a powerful reason to engage beyond just, academic curiosity.
And we can use the tangible examples already in the piece. That line about boundary setting. Phones stay away just long enough. This is a perfect point of intervention.
Okay.
We should suggest specific strategies for managing that boundary to maximize the window for those bonding chemicals.
So instead of just saying, put the phones away, which is, pretty generic advice, how do we make that part of the ritual architecture itself?
By tying the action directly into the emotional start of the ritual, suggest a physical strategy, something like a special decorative box where all the phones are placed at a specific time, maybe when the first person wakes up.
Ah, okay.
The act of placing the phone in the box becomes its own new micro-ritual. It consciously engages the part of the brain that says, okay, the moment is starting now. It turns a simple description into a prescriptive tool.
I really like that. It moves it from generic advice to the deliberate application of these ritual levers we're talking about. So what about the reader whose ritual architecture is actually failing, or it needs repairing? Maybe the morning routine is stale, or it's tied to some past conflict.
For those cases, the material can offer advice on introducing a new sensory anchor. Since the existing ritual is flawed, the reader needs a new memory center to build on.
A new anchor.
Yeah. Suggest the deliberate introduction of a new sensory trigger, a specific scent that's only diffused on that day, or a piece of music played exclusively during that few-hour window. This conscious sensory intrusion can bypass the old, maybe negative associations and start to create a stronger, more desired, and repair-oriented memory center.
That gives the listener real agency. It lets them feel like they're managing their own memories, not just being subjected to them. Okay, let's turn our attention to the precision of the argument itself. We've established the writer uses powerful psychological ideas, emotional mirroring, dopamine, And that fantastic observation that children anchor the experience. Their excitement gives adults permission to feel joy again. These terms lend a ton of credibility.
They do. They really do. They make the material feel incredibly smart. The thing is, that powerful psychological vocabulary needs to be more explicitly leveraged to support the central argument about the precise mechanism of control.
See, I took the description of the psychochemical effects as being in itself the explanation of control. The ritual generates the dopamine locks in the memory. Where's the gap?
The gap is in the logical definition of the relationship. Right now, the psychochemical effects are asserted as facts. Morning light boosts dopamine. That's why the day feels hopeful before anything happens, which is great. But the connection between the effect, the dopamine hit, and the establishment of control by the ritual, it's currently implied.
Okay.
We need to define how the ritual is actively manipulating the chemistry to assert that control, rather than just being a simple catalyst for it.
Ah, that is a subtle but really profound shift. So you're suggesting we frame the ritual not just as an event that produces a good chemical outcome, but as an architect that actually designs the experience to maximally exploit those chemicals.
Exactly. The relationship between A, the chemical reaction, and B, the memory locking, it just needs a sharper logical definition. The suggestion is to make sure these psychological terms are presented not just as outcomes, but as tools the ritual uses to generate compliance, predictability, and that deep emotional investment.
That elevates the argument from simple description to a robust critique of the architecture's inherent power.
It really does.
So give me a concrete example. How is the ritual structure actively weaponizing chemistry for control instead of just benefiting from it passively?
Look at the structure of anticipation and reward. The material mentions the sequence of gift opening gifts in a sequence, waiting your turn, watching others react.
Right.
That structure is not random. It is an architecture that deliberately delays gratification.
Ah, I see it now. By forcing the wait, and by forcing you to watch others experience their joy first, the ritual is maximizing the pent-up tension.
Precisely. And that delay intensifies the dopamine hit when it finally arrives for you, strengthening the memory lock exponentially. The ritual controls the timing, which means it controls the intensity of the chemical reward. That is control by optimization.
Control by optimization. That's a powerful line. We could use that same structure to deepen the discussion around emotional mirroring, too.
Absolutely. Explore how the ritual optimizes the specific timing and sequencing of the children's joy. How does it maximize the permission that adults receive to feel joy themselves?
The adult is watching the child. The ritual ensures the adult is present. The phone is away. They're focused on the child's reaction.
The sequence ensures the adult receives the full force of that genuine, untainted mirroring effect, forcing them into a state of pure emotional investment and reinforcing the whole loop.
Uh-huh.
So the question to ask is the mirroring just an observed phenomenon, something that happens, or is the ritual specifically designed to exploit this mirroring effect as a source of emotional control over the adults, forcing them into that desired nostalgic state? Making that logical jump truly validates the central thesis of control.
This has been a deeply insightful critique of material that is, already very original and highly compelling. We've really focused on 3 core opportunities that will take this from a compelling observation to an authoritative, comprehensive analysis.
That's right. First, the writer needs to nuance the relationship between our internal rituals and external corporations. Move past that false dichotomy and acknowledge the symbiosis there, the co-option. It makes the argument so much more resilient.
Second, there's a massive opportunity to elevate the material's relevance by moving from keen observation to actionable advice, empowering the reader to consciously design, maintain, or even repair their own ritual architecture.
And finally, we discuss strengthening the logical connection between those fascinating psychological mechanisms, the dopamine, the emotional mirroring, and the central concept of control itself, framing the psychochemistry as a tool the ritual actively uses, rather than just a passive side effect. The core essence of this piece is just exceptionally strong.
The foundation is absolutely there.
You've really uncovered the deep structure of the experience. Now it's about making that structure indefensible by addressing its context, its practical application, and its precise logical mechanism. We invite you to implement these high-level suggestions and submit the revised material back to us for another round of critique. We really look forward to seeing how you strengthen the architecture of your argument.